us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
Welcome back. You're watching WION World is One. This is another edition of World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of the global curve. I'm Shivan Chatna.
And I'm Hem Kaur Soroya. The Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, it faces dire conditions described as catastrophic. Essential units have failed, leading to desperate measures. This even as Israel now claims to have taken control of the Gaza parliament, which was the seat of power for Hamas. Israel also claims Hamas is no more in control of the Gaza Strip. We'll, of course, bring you all the details on this.
Unrelenting Israeli strikes continued in Gaza. At least 31 individuals lost their lives in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza due to Israeli bombings. Additionally, Israeli air attacks targeted residential buildings as well in the Nusrat and the Deir al-Bala refugee camps in central Gaza.
On the show, we'll also have with us our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who will be joining us from New York. Later on the show, we'll also be joined by Alison Lagrange, getting us all the updates from the world of showbiz.
All this and a lot more in the next 60 minutes right here on World DNA. Let's get you started with the headlines first.
Israel Defense Minister says Hamas no more in control of Gaza City. IDF picture shows soldiers taking control of Gaza Parliament building.
Most hospitals in Gaza City remain under siege as US President Joe Biden says the main hospitals must be protected. Israel's military releases video showing rooms in the basement of a hospital where it believes the militants were holding some of the hostages.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaks to newly appointed British Foreign Minister David Cameron. The former UK Prime Minister is briefed on the Israel-Hamas conflict, relations with China and help for Ukraine during a telephone call.
Returning to the stand in his family's civil fraud trial in New York, Donald Trump Jr. describes his father as an artist with real estate, says the ex-president was a genius with the ability to create luxury from nothing.
World number 2 Carlos Alcaraz suffers defeat on his ATP Finals debut as two-time champion Alexander Zverev battles back from a set down to win in Italy. Now, the situation in West Asia remains tense, to say the least. Almost 6 weeks into the war, Israeli strikes have flattened substantial parts of Gaza. And today, we'll take you through the battleground Gaza and the different theaters where the war is unfolding and the impact that it's leaving on ground. The only lifeline that gave some sort of hope to the Palestinians were the hospitals. Al-Shifa, Al-Quds, two of the biggest hospitals here. The complete blockade and the Hamas's hiding strategy, as claimed by Israel, it's made matters worse. For days now, hospitals, medical facilities have become the key target of relentless bombardment from Israel. Hamas's health ministry has claimed that all hospitals in north of Gaza are out of service. They're no longer functioning. Medical services can be barely administered in northern Gaza. This includes the two biggest hospitals, as I mentioned earlier, in the Gaza Strip, which have been rendered out of service. The Al-Shifa and the Al-Quds Hospital in the Gaza city have suspended operations entirely. The WHO, it managed to speak to health professionals at the Al-Shifa hospital. They described a dire and perilous situation, saying that it was not functioning as a hospital anymore, with constant gunfire and bombing exacerbating the already critical circumstances. The situation in Gaza's largest hospital, it's appalling to say the least. Premature babies who were placed in incubators are now being wrapped in foil, placed next to hot water in a desperate bid to keep them alive. As of now, a total of 7 premature babies, 27 critical patients have died in Al-Shifa hospital, according to the Deputy Health Minister in the Hamas-run Gaza Strip. They fear the death toll among patients will rise in the coming hours. Now, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry further added that at least 2,300 people are still inside Al-Shifa hospital in an update that was shared by the WHO. A doctor in the region said that the Al-Shifa hospital can no longer accept patients. Ambulances, they've stopped evacuating the wounded Palestinians and bringing them to Al-Shifa. Meanwhile, the staff inside says it's impossible to leave without risking injury or death. Medical workers are warning of rising casualties among patients. According to the UN's humanitarian agency, 20 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are no longer functioning since Israel announced the complete siege of the Strip. According to multiple reports, there's no food, no fuel to run the generators here. Solar energy is being used to power a few of the critical systems. That's not enough. Now moving on to Gaza City, where Gaza's parliament building is located. An image circulating on social media shows troops of the IDF's 13th Battalion, the Golani Brigade, inside the parliament building, raising Israel flag inside the Hamas militant seat of political power after the IDF troops captured this site. This is the visual. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, also said that Hamas has lost control in the Gaza Strip as the Israeli Defense Forces move to fully capture Gaza City. He further added, terrorists are fleeing south, civilians are looting Hamas bases, and they have no confidence in the government. Within hours of Israel's defense minister's announcement, rockets were seen being launched towards Israel from Gaza. Sirens were also heard in central Israel. You can see these visuals. But as seen from Sderot, the missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome. Although, according to the Ashkelon Coast Regional Council, one rocket fell in the region. No injuries were reported, but buildings and vehicles were damaged. As rockets were fired into Israel from southern Gaza, hundreds of thousands of refugees are in the midst of a humanitarian crisis that's deepening by the hour, pushing every possible safety net to the brink. People are washing themselves in polluted seawater, sleeping in packed tents, eating what little bread they can find, or on some days, none at all. The people are coming from Gaza's north, fleeing Israel's bombing campaign, some with a few possessions, but most bearing only their children and the clothes on their backs. While at the Rafah crossing, the first group of foreigners and injured Palestinians evacuated after the Rafah border crossing reopened arrived in Egypt from Gaza. According to reports, the groups that entered into Egypt comprised of 7 injured Gaza residents along with more than 80 foreign nationals and their dependents. The border crossing was closed for nearly 2 days since the 10th of November due to issues that were related to transportation of injured Palestinians from northern Gaza. With the border crossing reopening, around 88 trucks arrived in the Gaza Strip from Egypt. With the reopening of Rafah crossing, there are fears of a wider regional conflict in West Asia, as cross-border hostilities between Israeli military and Hezbollah continue to rise. The militant group Hezbollah fired anti-tank missiles towards Israeli troops near the border's western sector. In retaliation, Israel's defense forces carried out airstrikes along with the country's border with Lebanon. There are also reports of a convoy of journalists that came under attack near the Lebanese border. IDF claimed that the targets included terror infrastructure, weapons storage compounds, and an operational command center used by Hezbollah. This is what the situation is on ground currently in Gaza. And to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Irina Sukuman, Middle East analyst and human rights activist, joining us from Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Ma'am, to begin with, let's talk about the uproar that the operations in Gaza have caused. What options would you say President Joe Biden is considering as protests escalate in the United States, including Chicago, and the Indonesian Prime Minister also, in fact, urging him to take more action, while, of course, emphasizing the need to protect hospitals in Gaza?
Well, President Biden did emphasize that same issue, the need to protect hospitals to Israel. But for now, he has ruled out the possibility of a ceasefire. First, because Israel itself has ruled out that option. And second, it probably would not accomplish all that much at this point. In terms of addressing the uproar, he has had many Zoom calls and other outreach efforts with members of Arab American and Muslim American communities in the United States, discussing the White House strategy to combat Islamophobia that was recently released as planned. Also discussing the humanitarian aid efforts by the United States to deliver humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now, many of these communities have been pushing for a ceasefire, but no one has actually concretely described what outcome they would expect the ceasefire to accomplish. A ceasefire would not restore fuel, electricity, or fix those hospitals. A ceasefire would not return the conditions for the refugees to come back. So the only thing it would actually allow to do is for Hamas to relocate and possibly utilize the humanitarian crossings to make an escape from Gaza. Otherwise, everything that could be done by Israel specifically at this moment is already being done through humanitarian pauses, through evacuation assistance efforts, through warnings to the civilian population, and through airdrops by Jordan.
Ms. Sukuman, I just want to come in here.
Those options are limited.
Yes, I just want to take your thoughts on this now, in the context of diplomacy. You know, how does Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen propose to expand this window of legitimacy? Because this window of legitimacy is something they have been talking about. They are expecting international pressure to come in any time. They plan to expand that window. How do you propose he would sort of expect to expand that?
The only issue that Israel can actually bring up is engage with the international community in a dialogue about options for Gaza, for separately for long-term governance issue, which needs to be discussed regardless of pressure. This is just a practical step that needs to be considered at early, at middle, and at later stages of the war. But the second issue is also humanitarian management, because so far we are hearing a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of calls for ceasefire to end the war, but no practical solution to handling these humanitarian concerns, while also allowing Israel to do what it needs to do to restore deterrence, which is to destroy the military hold by Hamas in Gaza completely. I think one reason why this has not happened already, and is very unlikely to happen in the near future, because no one is willing to concede that in order to work with Israel on this issue, in order to solve this problem and to provide the assistance that Gaza residents need, they would need to apply pressure on Hamas and not only on Israel to stop preventing civilians from being able to leave, to evacuate to safety, from withholding fuel, from withholding humanitarian aid, and from using terror to impose humanitarian needs. And Hamas is a terrorist organization. It does not listen to diplomacy. It can only listen to pressure, which means cutting off humanitarian aid that goes to Gaza NGOs and to foreign accounts.
Ms. Sukuman, in fact, I was just going to come to this, speaking of options for Gaza and deterrence, and just for better understanding, you've mostly covered these points. As we see Israeli forces continue with their unrelenting strikes and operations, the scale of destruction, the civilian death toll is mounting exponentially. To what extent can Israel justify its operations, especially when lives of infants, critical patients are at stake? Now, my question here is evacuating these already overwhelmed hospitals the only way for Israel in its hunt for Hamas militants, or do you think at this point they need to consider other options as well to carry out their operations?
There are no real other options. The only option is if the international community assists in evacuating those hospitals, which should have been and was possible to do weeks ago, because Israel made no secret of the fact that these hospitals are being used by Hamas for storing weapons and so forth. Secretary Blinken made public testimony about it. The European Union has expressed concern about this as well quite publicly. So at every step of the way, the international community has balked at taking action to prevent these disasters from happening, then reacts by pressuring Israel when it's already too late to do anything, and when already they are at the door, when it's no longer possible to evacuate those hospitals. And the question is, why this double standard? Why not utilize opportunities before they come to a point of no return? The question is, the issue is, a lot of these concerns are crocodile tears on the part of the international community. They're not willing to provide safe haven for Gaza civilians. They have not been willing to even offer an evacuation of infants and very young minors on a sort of kinder transport to Europe, the United States, or elsewhere.
All right. Well, Ms. Sukuman, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA with your insights on this.
Thank you so much.
All right, Turkish President Erdogan continues to raise his pitch over the crisis in Gaza after attending the Islamic Arab Summit.
Right, and where Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Israel was taking revenge on Gaza civilians, he is all set to visit Berlin this week. And in the latest, Israeli relatives of hostages kidnapped by Hamas have called on the German Chancellor to discuss their situation with the Turkish president.
We know Erdogan is coming here in a few days, and we demand that Germany, in the opportunity of meeting him, will talk about the hostage situation with him. We know obviously it's complicated and there are many political forces involved in our region and in this situation now, but this is, as I said, a humanitarian crisis and it needs to be over. They have to be home, and we expect Germany to do whatever it can in every channel of it to do so.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has reiterated his stance, saying that a two-state solution is the way forward for long-lasting peace in the Israel-Palestine conflict. He added that this is only possible without the radical Islamic organization Hamas.
Und weil wir das tun und weil es die Werte sind, um die es geht, setzen wir uns natürlich dafür ein, dass humanitäre Hilfe nach Gaza gelangen kann, dass Staatsangehörige anderer Länder, dass Kranke dort rauskommen können, dass es auch nicht passiert, dass es Übergriffe in der Westbank gibt. Setzen wir uns dafür ein, dass alles getan wird, dass die Geiseln freigelassen werden. Und natürlich haben wir auch eine klare Perspektive, denn ein dauerhafter Frieden, der wird nur möglich sein, wenn Israel und ein palästinensischer Staat friedlich nebeneinander existieren können. Die Zwei-Staaten-Lösung ist etwas, was wir immer vertreten haben und auch jetzt und in dieser Situation, weil es um eine Perspektive geht. Aber da ist klar, eine Organisation wie Hamas, die wir zu Recht als terroristisch in Deutschland eingestuft haben, deren Ziel die Ermordung von Juden ist, die Vertreibung der israelischen Bürgerinnen und Bürger aus dem Gebiet, in dem sie heute leben. Eine solche Organisation ist nicht die Grundlage für ein Zwei-Staaten-Modell. Das ist eine Terrororganisation und sie muss bekämpft werden.
Now, while the world awaits the Arab League's response to Israel's out-of-line actions in Gaza, we've been trying to get some more answers as well.
Our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, spoke to the Arab League's ambassador to India. Listen into what he has to say on this.
Do you think that the UN has failed in terms of resolving the ongoing conflict in West Asia? We have seen resolutions being passed, but at the end of the day, what the UNSC can do and what the UNGA can do is two different things. UNGA can put a voice, but the teeth have to be provided by the UNSC.
Well, the Security Council members, as you say, as you know, they have different interests. I mean, on the Palestinian cause, there was I can call it as a failure to find out, a resolution which will be agreeable by all members. And this is really disappointed. I mean, we look at the United Nations and Security Council is very important, element and important organization, international organization, to enhance stability and peace all over the world, not only, Middle East or Africa or wherever, but in general, this is their task. And we look forward also, we are calling the UN and Security Council to push for a peaceful resolution which will enhance the stability and security on the region. And that will be, the stability is good for all parts, not only for the Arab state or for the Israel or for Palestinian. This is good for the regional area and international community as well.
As the Israel-Hamas war continues to intensify, WION's correspondent Jody Cohen spoke exclusively to the spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces, Jonathan Conricus. Take a look at this.
I'm with Jonathan Conricus, the International IDF spokesperson. Jonathan, thank you for speaking with WION. Now, the IDF has said that one of its goals is to dismantle Hamas in Gaza. How close is the Israel Defense Forces to that goal?
Thank you for having me. We're making very good progress. We are advancing according to our military plan, which started with an aerial campaign of striking and degrading Hamas and its military capabilities.
What can you tell us on the latest on the fighting right now in Gaza?
Well, I can report that as of today, our intelligence assessment is that we have significantly degraded the combat capabilities of 10 out of 12 Hamas battalions that are located and fighting in northern Gaza.
What can you tell us about the strategy to get the hostages back? We know that almost 240 people are being held in Gaza. They've been there for the past month. What can you tell us about the diplomatic strategy as well as the military strategy to try and get the hostages released?
Yeah, let's speak first and foremost about values and commitment. There is a clear, united commitment in Israel that we have to bring our people back. That's the first and most important thing.
We're hearing growing calls from the international community, including countries that are allies with Israel, for Israel to do more to protect Gazan civilians. What can you tell us about what's being done and what more can be done to protect the civilians of Gaza?
A tremendous amount is being done by Israel, and I think it is underreported in Western media, not so much in Indian media, but in Western media I think it's underreported. And I think that what we are doing as an combatant in the battlefield is above and beyond what is required of a military in combat.
Let's shift our focus for now. David Cameron has made a surprising comeback to UK politics. The former Prime Minister has now been appointed the Foreign Secretary of the country. And the very unusual decision comes after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak carried out a major reshuffle.
Now, Sunak welcomed Cameron in a speech and said that his appointment comes in deeply challenging times. He said that Cameron will build on UK's past achievements in foreign policy. Listen to this.
These are deeply challenging times for our world. Events far beyond our shores echo here at home, with implications for our security, our economy and our very social fabric. It falls to us to do everything we can to shape these events. And so we've delivered one of the most significant years for British foreign policy in recent times. That's due in no small part to James Cleverly, and I know that he'll bring the same vigour to the equally vital job of Home Secretary. And I'm pleased to have appointed a new Foreign Secretary who will build on everything that we have achieved in the last year.
Sunak also used his speech to speak about the Israel-Hamas war. He condemned Hamas's attack on the 7th of October and reiterated that Israel must be able to defend itself against terror, but added that protection of civilian lives must be ensured. He said that a long-lasting peace could only be ensured with a two-state solution.
We must unite around the only answer that can come close to creating peace in these troubled lands, the only answer that can acknowledge the history and hurt of both peoples, the only answer that can allow a new future to be born, and that is a two-state solution.
Soon after his appointment, Cameron also spoke to US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and discussed the Israel-Hamas war. Both leaders also discussed relations with China and help for Ukraine during a telephonic conversation on Monday.
Now, Cameron's return comes in a cabinet reshuffle, which was triggered by the firing of Suella Braverman as the country's Home Secretary. She's been sacked from the role after criticism of police for their favourable treatment of pro-Palestine protesters.
James Cleverly, who was still now serving as the Foreign Secretary, has replaced Braverman, and Cameron now fills Cleverly's position. Cameron's appointment as Foreign Secretary comes as a surprise, though. A former Prime Minister accepting a portfolio in a future cabinet almost goes against convention. Such a move has not been seen in British politics for more than 53 years.
Analysts say that with Cameron, Rishi Sunak is trying to bring in more of a centrist part of his Conservative Party after the latest controversy with Braverman. However, this does not go well with the populist right of his party.
Cameron has been out of politics since 2016. He is not even a current member of the British Parliament. He returns to the government via an appointment to the House of Lords. Cameron left politics after he resigned from the PM position after UK voted to leave the European Union. He campaigned for staying in the European Union. Interestingly, Rishi Sunak, who was then an unknown backbencher, supported Brexit and defied Cameron at that time.
Sunak and Cameron have clashed publicly as well. Last year, Sunak suggested that a golden era of warm relations between Britain and China during Cameron's tenure had been naive, while Cameron recently claimed Sunak's decision to scrap a key part of a high-speed rail project.
But now, while accepting his new role, Cameron took to social media and said that though he may have disagreed with Sunak on some decisions, he is a strong and capable Prime Minister.
And with that, it's time now for a short break.
Don't go anywhere. Lots more on the other side right here on World DNA. Now, in his second appearance in court over former President Trump's civil fraud trial, Donald Trump Jr., Trump's eldest son, testified that the company's assets were extremely valuable. This after the court asserted that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the value of his real estate assets. We will get you all the details on this after the break.
Also on the other side, former UK Prime Minister David Cameron has vowed to support Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after making a surprise cabinet comeback. Cameron has been appointed as the new Foreign Secretary of the country. We'll get you all the details on this and more on the other side of World DNA. Do stay tuned.
Israel woke up to a barrage of thousands of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hostilities have broken out between Israel and Palestine, and the tensions that had been gathering steam over the course of the last several weeks and months.
The siren has gone off. I don't know if you can hear in the background what's going on. I'm going into the shelter now. So it's a very, very serious situation here across Israel. It's a state of emergency.
The United States stands with Israel.
Well, we are starting this broadcast with a developing story from West Asia, where Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Hamas has launched a war against the state of Israel.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world. We do the difficult part.
This weapon has been banned, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic.
We also tell you why what's happening.
New drug is making a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. This medicine helps slow down a patient's cognitive decline.
We look beyond the text. We give you context.
Is China preparing for a war in the Himalayas? And tonight, we come to you with some proof.
Hypocrisy is stunning.
Do leaders mean what they say? Do they ever say what they mean? To find out how real news affects you, your decisions,
Just when Iran took one step in the right direction, its moral police is planning to drag it further back. And once again, the victim will be women.
watch Gravitas.
Welcome and thanks for tuning in.
Welcome back to World DNA. Thank you so much for staying with us. So far on the show, we've gotten you all the updates on the health crisis that Gaza is facing currently. The Al-Shifa hospital, the biggest in the Gaza Strip, it's no longer functioning. In fact, infants are being wrapped in foil just to keep them warm and to be able to keep them alive. That's the situation. It's being described as catastrophic, to say the least.
Majority of the hospitals have already been destroyed. They are not functional in Gaza, and of course the destruction continues. Israel claims that Hamas is no longer in control of the Gaza Strip, and of course there are no signs of Israel backing off. We are tracking everything that's happening in the Israel-Hamas front, but we're also looking at everything else happening around the globe. Let's get you started with the headlines at this hour. This is World DNA.
Israel Defense Minister says Hamas no more in control of Gaza City. IDF picture shows soldiers taking control of Gaza Parliament building.
Most hospitals in Gaza City remain under siege as US President Joe Biden says main hospitals must be protected. Israel's military releases videos showing rooms in the basement of a hospital where it believes the militants were holding some of the hostages.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaks to newly appointed British Foreign Minister David Cameron. The former UK Prime Minister is briefed on the Israel-Hamas conflict, relations with China and help for Ukraine during a telephone call.
Returning to the stand in his family's civil fraud trial in New York, Donald Trump Jr. describes his father as an artist with real estate, says the ex-president of the US was a genius with the ability to create luxury from nothing.
Former South African pacer Morne Morkel resigns as the Pakistan cricket team's bowling coach after the team's elimination from the World Cup in India. We're starting with the latest in Trump's legal battles. In his second appearance at former President Trump's civil fraud trial, Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., lauded the sexiness of his father's property portfolio.
Well, everything from his body language to the choice of words, it tells you a lot about how serious they are about this as well. Now, the statement comes in stark contrast to Justice Arthur Engoron's ruling in September, stating that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the value of his real estate assets.
Now, hailing the former president as a visionary at the New York court on Monday, Trump Jr. claimed that the sexiness of his father's real estate projects were key to attracting licensing deals with developers who wanted to emulate the tycoon's style.
Now, this statement was objected to by lawyers from Attorney General Letitia James' office. However, Justice Arthur Engoron, who was accused of bias by Trump and his legal team, permitted the testimony. Scheiding let him go ahead and talk about how great the Trump organization really is. Now, justifying its high valuation, defense lawyer Clifford Robert walked the court through an extensive slideshow of Trump's real estate portfolio.
In opposition, state lawyer Colleen Fahey put forth the evidence providing Trump's 40 Wall Street properties to be at risk of defaulting on its mortgage.
But it doesn't matter because it's a witch hunt. It always has been. But the precedent that it sets for New York business, if you don't perhaps donate to Letitia James' re-election campaign, I too will go after your billion-dollar transactions. It's ripe for extortion and corruption.
Donald Trump, who is the current frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, has been accused of inflating the net worth of his empire by as much as $2.2 billion. Now, the lawsuit by New York Attorney General Letitia James is seeking between $250 and $300 million in damages, along with a blanket ban on the Trumps from dealing in New York's real estate sector.
Apart from Trump Jr.'s 2 court appearances, his younger brother Eric testified on the 3rd of November, while his sister Ivanka also appeared in court on the 8th, but not as a defendant. All 3 have denied involvement in preparing their father's financial statements, placing the onus of bookkeeping on Trump Organization's accountants instead.
Donald Trump himself testified earlier on the 8th of November, where he acknowledged inaccuracies in his financial statement, but dismissed them as irrelevant to the banks from whom he sought loans. Earlier in September, Justice Arthur Engoron ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the value of his real estate assets.
Engoron has ordered the dissolution of companies that control Trump's portfolio, including the Trump Tower in Manhattan. As of now, the ruling holds pending an appeal. Trump is also a defendant in the 4 criminal cases, including 2 over an attempt to overturn his 2020 electoral loss. The former president has pleaded not guilty in all 4 cases. Now, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report on why it's important for defense to present its case even after the judge's ruling. Listen in.
Donald Trump Jr. was back on the witness stand at a courtroom here in New York City, but this time as the first witness for the defense. You may remember that last week the state rested its case after calling all its witnesses, and now the Trump team have an opportunity to present their case and call their own witnesses. According to one of Trump's lawyers, this process will end around December 15th. And while many may wonder why the Trump team is going out of its way to do so, considering the fact that the judge, not a jury, has already decided that the Trump organization has had some wrongdoing at least. But first of all, the judge has not decided how much to fine the Trump organization and whether or not it will be able to operate here in New York City. And most analysts believe that there's no doubt that this case will go for an appeal. And what happens in this courtroom, well, will make all the difference for that appeal court as well.
Susan further explains how much of these trials are mere political theatre in the lead up to the 2023, in the lead up to the presidential elections.
This is one of several cases that the former president is dealing with as he continues to be the clear frontrunner in the Republican primary. We did learn from a number of reporters who were in that courtroom that lawyers for Attorney General Letitia James grew quote unquote frustrated because Don Jr. had the opportunity to not only praise his father and their company, but what some called quote unquote an infomercial. Nonetheless, the court has to allow the defense to present their witnesses. And Don Jr. also was cross-examined briefly by the state as well.
Now, there is one thing about flying that hasn't changed since the Wright brothers made the first aeroplane in 1903.
Besides better engines and aircraft designs, most modern planes have one thing in common: they all use fossil fuels. Take a look at our next report based on Bloomberg analyses to delve a little deeper into this.
Similar to electric cars, more and more startups and big manufacturers are now trying to make airplanes electric. Last month, Beta Technologies flew a battery-powered plane covering 1,730 miles to make its first delivery to the United States Air Force. Joby Aviation sent one of its own all-electric 4-seater air taxis to Edwards Air Force Base in September. Also last year, Aviation Aircraft tested a 9-seater electric passenger plane called Alice. The company said it had gotten almost 300 orders for Alice planes worth over $2 billion. As the aircraft business is pushed to reduce its carbon footprint, more and more electric options will appear. These days, flying is dirty. The International Energy Agency says that every year the airline business releases about 800 million tons of carbon dioxide. That's the same amount of pollution that Germany puts out in a year. Bloomberg analyses show that at least 60 companies are now working on research and development for electric planes. A markets research firm predicts the global electric aircraft market will reach $37.2 billion by 2030, which is more than 4 times the $8.8 billion in 2022. Startups and big makers are both moving into the sector because of this outlook. But there are still a lot of big problems to solve before the technology can be widely used. And these include power issues, high prices, and government approvals. Most projects are also still only in the test flight phase at the moment. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Exciting developments in the cosmos as Virgin Galactic announces a strategic pause in space flight operations to gear up for the next era of space exploration.
Well, let's dive into the details. Take a look at this one.
Space sector giant Virgin Galactic is shifting gears. Plans are underway to pause spaceflight operations in 2024 and redirect focus towards the development of the cutting-edge Delta-class spacecraft. Investors responded with enthusiasm as Virgin Galactic's stocks surged 19.2%, closing at $1.86 a share. Despite a challenging year, the company's innovative approach continues to captivate the stock market. Virgin Galactic CEO Michael Colglazier said in a statement that the company is confident of having enough capital to bring its first 2 Delta ships into service by 2026 and generate positive cash flow. The journey towards innovation often involves tough decisions. Virgin Galactic recently cut its workforce by 18% to strategically realign resources and decrease costs to save around $25 million. Virgin Galactic posted a net loss of $104.6 million, beating analysts' expectations. Despite challenges, revenue climbed to $1.7 million, showcasing resilience in the face of change. The company's commitment to space tourism remains unwavering. With its 5th successful commercial spaceflight completed, Virgin Galactic is pushing boundaries and expanding its fleet beyond the VSS Unity. Looking ahead, the Delta-class spacecraft is on the horizon. Virgin Galactic aims for an improved weekly flight rate and plans to open a new production facility in Phoenix by mid-2024. In the ever-evolving space race, Virgin Galactic charts a course towards a future of innovation and exploration. Stay tuned as we witness the unfolding of the next chapter in space travel. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Moving on now, if you're on Threads, the social media platform, the story is for you. Threads users can now remove their posts from Instagram as well as Facebook.
Well, the new feature allows users to opt out of sharing their Threads posts on other Meta platforms. Meta's For You on Threads carousel feature was initially intended to drive engagement on Threads. For instance, a friend of yours might see on Instagram that you've posted on Threads, which may lead to your friend opening an account on Threads. Now, that was the intention behind it. The move, however, has backfired. The feature faced criticism from users who did not want their posts shared on Instagram and Facebook. Now, users who want to remove their posts from being suggested on Instagram and Facebook can go to the privacy section of their Threads app. Click on suggesting posts on other apps and turn off post suggestions on both Instagram and Facebook using the toggle. Do note that Meta is rolling out this feature slowly. So if you still don't see the switch off option yet, give it some more time.
Meanwhile, Meta recently announced that the company would soon allow users to delete their Threads account without having to delete their Instagram account. And according to media reports, this feature will be made available to users by December. The lack of an account delete option on Threads without having to delete the Instagram account has drawn criticism from users since the launch of the social media platform. Now, floating solar panels on lakes and ponds is thought to be by many to be an economic way of maximizing space for renewable energy generation without using prime farmland or land.
Well, we don't know what the impact is on the aquatic environment underneath the arrays of solar panels, and that's not the case anymore. A team from Cornell University in New York State has floated nearly 400 solar panels across 3 ponds at the Cornell Experimental Pond facility adjacent to the airport.
We're trying to get a better understanding for what happens when you put floating solar on a water body. There's increased shade. How does this affect things like aquatic plants, aquatic invertebrates, greenhouse gas emissions, the microbial community, and sort of the inner workings of these aquatic ecosystems with the sort of anthropogenic disturbance of floating solar added into the mix. And so we're really trying to determine, what the effects are just in general, so positive, neutral, or negative, just trying to better understand how to inform sustainable floating solar development if it does indeed take off.
Now, Steve, along with his team, are studying how floating solar panels affect the water, microbes, plants, and the fish living in it. They're also tracking the pond's greenhouse gas emissions, summertime algae growth, bioacoustics, and environmental DNA.
So we're collecting a whole suite of ecological attributes and trying to better understand the interactions between the floating solar deployments and the aquatic ecosystems, and then we'll continue to do that through time because there can be changes that occur over the course of time. And so we're seeing, preliminarily some somewhat rapid changes, for example, where plants are growing in these ponds, but then as time goes on, the interactions between the floating solar deployments and different biogeochemical processes, for example, can change through time. So it's important to address those changes and conduct the study over a period of years.
According to the team, allowing floating solar panels to be deployed on federal reservoirs in the U.S. could save 5 million acres of land and meet 10% of the country's electricity needs. Steve said that while interest in waterborne solar panels is rising, the transition to renewable energy must incorporate sustainability from the start to avoid any kind of unintended consequences down the road.
Moving on now, India and New Zealand will lock horns in the first semi-final of the 2023 ICC World Cup on Wednesday.
Hosts India will enter the clash in Mumbai as the favourites, and the toss could play a huge role here in determining the outcome of the match. Now, India won each of their 9 matches in the group stages, including the one against Kiwis in Dharamshala. Now, the men in blue have been unstoppable so far, but will be up against their bogey side in ICC events. 4 years back, at this very stage, it was New Zealand who came out on top in what proved to be MS Dhoni's final match in international cricket.
In fact, India's victory in the group stages last month broke a 20-year jinx against the Black Caps at the ICC events. The pressure will be on Rohit Sharma's side at the Wankhede Stadium, where the side batting first has dominated in the tournament so far. The average score for the team batting at the Wankhede during the World Cup has been 57 for 6, while it is 188 for 9 for the chasing team.
Look, I think the stats are probably favouring batting first, but at the same time, it's A, not up to me, and B, we have to play the game on the day. So whatever it might be, bat or bowl first, we've got plans for that, and it's important to stick to them. Obviously, nice to bowl under lights, and always from a bowling point of view, nice to see when the ball does move around a bit and brings us into the game. So we'll just have to play it as we see it come game day, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right, now let's take a look at what else is making news in the world of sports. Meghan Markle has resigned as Pakistan's bowling coach 2 days after the team failed to reach the semi-finals of the World Cup in India. Pakistan crashed out of the World Cup following a 93-run defeat against outgoing champions England in Kolkata on Saturday. The Pakistan Cricket Board said that Morkel's replacement would be announced before the team's 3-test tour of Australia in December. The 36-year-old former South Africa fast bowler joined the Pakistan team on a 6-month contract in June this year. Thousands of supporters paid their final tributes to one of England's greatest ever footballers, Bobby Charlton.
Manchester United and England midfielder Charlton was laid to rest at Manchester Cathedral following his